man from the South Bay is under arrest tonight in federal custody after officials say he tried to cash in on the Guthrie kidnapping tragedy. Police say 42-year-old Derek Colella sent an imposter ransom demand by text message to the Guthrie family.
Colella was quickly identified through his email account and was taken into federal custody.
This morning, new details in the increasingly desperate search for Nancy Guthrie.
Whoever is out there holding our mother, we want to hear from you.
Late last night, Savannah posting this video of her brother Cameron talking directly to the person or people who potentially took their 84-year-old mother.
We haven't heard anything directly. We need you to reach out, and we need a way to communicate with you so we can move forward.
Let's start out with the ransom notes. What do you make of what we've seen so far?
So we don't know much about the ransom note. The SAC for the FBI seems to take it semi-seriously. But it had
semi-seriously?
Well, because it doesn't. I don't think he knows that it's maybe real or not yet.
But first, we have to know that you have our mom.
The video was posted just minutes after the first of two deadlines on a reported ransom note sent to 3 news outlets, according to the FBI.
The ransom note that was distributed to the media did make a demand for 5 p.m. today, and if a transfer wasn't made, then I think a second demand was for next Monday.
The special agent in charge says the FBI is still investigating the legitimacy of the ransom note, which he says referenced in Apple Watch and floodlights, information that was public.
By the way, I actually found an image of Nancy's Apple Watch on her wrist where she's with her daughter in studio. But I think that reference to the Apple Watch was where it was in terms of her house, if I remember correctly. In terms of the floodlights, I still haven't been able to locate them, even looking at aerial footage. I still don't see where these floodlights are.
But the note did not include any contact information.
In a normal kidnapping case, there would be contact by now.
Authorities also arresting a man they say sent a hoax ransom demand to Savannah's sister Annie and brother-in-law.
Colella was quickly identified through his email account and
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Well, we are on day 6 since Nancy Guthrie disappeared. Let me ask you, which is better, a handwritten ransom note or an emailed ransom note? By the way, here are real-life samples of both. This is from the Lindbergh kidnapping. And note just how brief both of these notes are. This is an email ransom note. According to CNN, emails have metadata and can be traced through internet servers. That's according to former FBI counterintelligence operative Eric O'Neill. For a normal person, it's difficult to hide where the email is moving through the internet. It's going to touch servers, and those are points of access for the FBI. Bitcoin is also a traceable currency which authorities can track. So for a normal person in a high-profile situation, email is a very poor choice, as we've seen. The question is, are we dealing with a normal person? Or are we dealing with a very organized, orchestrated situation? You can actually see where that Bitcoin address is in that wallet and any transactions that go in and out, said O'Neill. That gives the FBI in particular a very excellent avenue to start learning who owns the wallet. Because at some point, when you take money in cryptocurrency, you have to turn it into cash. Otherwise, it's worthless. And it's at that point that the person can be identified. Now, the answer to the question, which is better, is really neither. The best option is probably something like this or this. Even then, they are going to examine vestiges on the paper. They're going to look at the glue and also examine the source of the paper, the glue, and possible DNA traces and fingerprints.
Colella's Hawthorne neighbors tell us that the FBI showed up in their neighborhood around 4 this morning. They say they heard some loud bangs, and then the FBI saying, "This is the FBI, come out with your hands up." They then saw Colella being handcuffed behind his back and put into a white van.
The special agent in charge says the FBI is still investigating the legitimacy of the ransom note, which he says referenced in Apple Watch and floodlights, information that was publicly available.
And that is how, and also what happened with John Mark Carr. He simply followed the Ramsey case from a distance from Thailand, actually. And just because people weren't that informed on the case, they thought that he knew things that weren't publicly available when they were. And so for a while, they thought he was a genuine ransom note writer when he was also an imposter. In this analysis, I want to talk about Nancy's social media. What does it tell us about her? But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please do hit the thanks button and let's get started. So this was Nancy's final social media post, published just 3 days before her abduction on the 28th of January. As you can see, it is overtly political. Trump ICE murder victim Alex Preddy was honored at the VA hospital where he helped countless people who served this nation. Are you mad yet? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Are you mad yet? In all caps. That final sentence is telling, isn't it? Now, about a week earlier, we see this post from January 21st, which is clearly a barb against President Trump. If you've been watching the news, you know this was a very high-profile incident where the Canadian Prime Minister stood up against Trump in Davos amongst world leaders. Nancy Guthrie posted this on the 21st of January. A moment worth watching. Mark Carney just delivered the kind of clear-eyed, unapologetically Canadian leadership the world needs, which is an indirect criticism, I guess, against American leadership. Then this from Nancy Guthrie. Overnight in Davos, Switzerland, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney delivered what I suspect will be recorded in future history textbooks as an era-defining speech. A day earlier, another viral post concerning ICE. By the way, all 4 of these posts are viral posts. All 4 are political from Nancy Guthrie. All 4 clearly indicate Nancy's political leanings. There's no doubt about that. The same with this post dealing with Greenland. You know, the whole Greenland-Denmark debacle, published on the same day. That's 5 overtly political messages in a row. Here's number 6, also published on January 20th. A week earlier, number 7, with Nancy writing a single word, a single title. Disgusting. The next is a very personal and private family photo taken on the day after Christmas, posted onto social media. So you can see a lot of politics and then a private family photo between all of that. Family looking happy. 10 days earlier, we see Nancy is back to the same theme. And the next post. After a post of a bobcat in Annie's backyard and a picture of what looks like a nice pie, Nancy returns to her anti-ICE activism online. This is from the 20th of November. Now, in a previous video, I speculated that if, and it is contingent on if, and we can't say for sure whether it is or if it isn't, but if the motive isn't money, what else could it be? My speculation wasn't a shot in the dark. It was based on carefully reviewing and studying Nancy's social media. I've provided a sample for you guys in this video.
Well, I've read the case files, have you? Everything you need to find him is right there in those pages.
Could that be true here as well? Everything we need to find him is in these social media posts. Now, many of you in the comments scoffed at a political agenda as being a ridiculous idea. Some of you think it's crazy that someone who simply has a different political position might be harmed by someone else with a different political position, and yet that is exactly what our TVs have been filled with for the past several weeks in Minneapolis.
First principles, Clarice. Simplicity. Read Marcus Aurelius. Of each particular thing, ask, what is it in itself? What is its nature? What does he do, this man you seek?
Well, he seems to be online, and if the ransom note is legit, it's also emailed, so does that actually prove that it's the same person? Well, possibly, but it also seems to indicate something else. Now, this is not about your political position or mine, or which party you support, or what you agree with. This is about Nancy. And in the absence of any real ransom note or any communication whatsoever, could it be that some local who knew Nancy and perhaps was affiliated in some ways with the folks Nancy was criticizing forcefully perhaps that person wanted to forcefully respond. Now, I agree that in principle, hurting an old lady to get some sort of payback for some online criticism is not only silly, but sort of pointless. What are you really going to achieve with that? But we have to imagine that we've got to imagine this in a more contextual sense. How could this have been personal to someone if it was personal? How could this have really bothered someone if it did? How could these social media posts have ignited a kind of murderous intent late on a Saturday night at the end of the first month of the year? I may not be an American, but I've got some huge maps of American states in my office, framed maps, and these are maps I bought in person when I traveled through America. One of them is actually a map of Arizona, including Tucson, Arizona. Tucson is a uniquely large American city just a stone's throw from the American border with Mexico. Tucson, I didn't know this, is a mostly Democratic enclave. Do I have that right? Which means if you support ICE or some other political party, you might feel in the minority in this particular city, in this particular setting, and you might also feel outnumbered, you might even feel bullied. Equally, you might feel the threat of immigrants, Mexicans, more keenly living so close to the border than, say, if you lived in Denver or Salt Lake City or Jackson Hole. Okay, but what could make someone deeply angry? Well, what if someone wasn't as financially well off as Nancy was and lived in an area where perhaps they had lost their job to an immigrant, or they were simply struggling to make ends meet, and this struggle had been politicized and someone seemed to be on their side? Someone was trying to protect their livelihoods, and here was a rich lady criticizing that political effort. That might be how they see it. Well, she couldn't she? While sitting beside her pool, she's typing out Facebook posts, in a kind of a luxurious setting. She's eating fancy meals with a famous daughter. She can afford to sort of do that. Now, I don't know about you, but that sort of resentment seems kind of natural, especially if you feed it. And if someone was obsessively watching this content and following conversations online obsessively, didn't this person develop some real animus? And didn't he want to eventually direct it at someone? If you still think this is a ridiculous theory, I'd like to hear one, but based on the evidence, based on what we know, that actually makes more sense. And in that regard, I think criticism is fine, but it's better to create something that others criticize than to create nothing and criticize others. So please do not send the idiotic idea that Nancy's daughter Annie and her husband are part of some nefarious plot in their part-time. I mean, while Savannah is actually staying with them, they have Nancy in the upside down and are sort of managing the whole thing by walkie-talkie. This isn't Stranger Things, where fiction doesn't really need to link up to reality or have any continuity. This is real life. I see millions of you watched a video about that because and why? I think that's what many of you want to hear. It's a quick, simple, and easy answer. It doesn't need any evidence. It saves us the trouble of doing the work of finding out who people are, asking troubling questions, getting uncomfortable answers to those questions, and finding out what really happened here. It feels like true crime has become about feeling strongly about something, so it's true. Do you see what you've just done if you do that? You've just proved the psychology I'm referring to here. Someone feels so strongly about Nancy and her political posts that they start to blame her, just as you have done with your hand-me-down suspect. It makes a lot of sense if you don't really think about it. By the way, Nancy posted about a similar thought process where feelings trump reality, where feelings determine reality, not facts or evidence, on November 11th. The trick in true crime, including this case, is to think about this through the frames of reference and the symbolic constructs of others. Our symbolic constructs are very important to us. Usually, the symbolic constructs of others are unknown to us, and even if they are known, they're not particularly important to us. And so what we need to try and do is not project our own into the fabric of this case. This, incidentally, is also the trick to navigating real life. That's at least if you want to live an effective life. Anyway, I'd be interested to hear what you think in the comments. Also, if you'd like me to continue deconstructing Nancy's social media, please do let me know in the comments. I'm not going to take it further than that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.